Go.
Good evening, everyone. So for those unfamiliar with some of my past presentations will know, although that are familiar with it will know that I love the weirdness of history. From the dead rising to attack Germans in World War One, to a Waffen-SS officer, a German army major, and a US army captain teaming up against Nazis. And tonight I'll be combining that weirdness of history with what I've been talking about at the end of last year, submarine warfare. So in 1970, BP oil pipeline workers came across a curious item about 12 miles southwest of Cruden Bay in Aberdeenshire, sitting about 86 meters under the surface. And that was an old German U-boat. It is widely believed that the following image is of that U-boat, but there's no primary source. The photographer is unknown, so we don't know if this is U-1206, but it is widely assumed to be her. And she's in fact one of the last U-boats to ever be sunk during World War II, not counting those that were deliberately sunk by the Allies after the war ended. But unlike many of her fellow subs, this one is the only one in recorded history to have been sunk owing to a sequence of events stemming from someone flushing a toilet incorrectly. So, what exactly happened? Of all the terrifying and deadly technology utilized by the Germans during both world wars, perhaps none were quite as infamous as the legendary U-boat. Though it wasn't the first submarine, the earliest one is known to have been built about 1600s, and it wasn't even the first military submarine that was built in 1777. But its fearsome reputation has carried it through the pages of history since the first one slipped under the water. Despite their awe-inspiring power, the submarines were far from invincible. Even the best engineers can only solve problems in front of them, and those that they can predict. Submarine technology was a slow crawl from its first 2 centuries or so, and U-boats, though much more advanced than their almost comically dangerous predecessors, remained it was possible that enemies could attack them and they can malfunction or have technical malfunctions. U-1206 was officially ordered on the 2nd of April 1942 and ultimately launched on December 30th, 1943. And about a year and a half later, on 6th of April 1945, the shiny new craft with its crew of 50 men departed from Kristiansand in Norway on its first non-stop training patrol mission. Pertinent to the topic at hand is that while most submarines at the time used a storage tank to stow the product of flushing on board, toilets, and other wastewater, with stereotypical German engineering efficiency, U-boat designers went the other way and decided to eject the waste directly into the ocean. On the plus side, this saved valuable space within the submarine while also reducing its weight. The downside, though, was that ejecting anything into the ocean required greater pressure inside than out. And as a result, U-boats had long required that in order to use the toilets, the ship would have to be near the surface. Of course, being so close to or on top of the surface is generally to be avoided when on patrol if a sub-captain doesn't want to see his ship blown up. And this resulted in crewmen who needed to go while submerged to do it in containers, which would then be stored appropriately until the sub needed to surface and the offending substance could be ditched overboard. As you can imagine, this didn't exactly improve the already less ideal smell of the air within the sub while it was plodding away down under. But there was nothing much that could have been done about this. That is until some unknown German engineers designed a high-pressure evacuation system. As to how this system worked, in a nutshell, the contents of the toilets were piped into an airlock of sorts, and once the offending matter found its way into said airlock, this would be sealed and subsequently pressurized, at which point a valve could be opened which would eject the fecal matters and fluids into the sea. This all brings us to 8 days into the patrol mission of U-1206. Now, before we get to this, it should be noted that there are two versions of what happened. One version is stated by literally every single source I could find discussing this event, as well as repeated on shows QI and found in countless books on the subject. As for the other version, if you dig a little deeper, thanks to the people at Deutsches U-Boat Museum archives, you can actually find the official account of the 27-year-old Captain Karl Adolf Schlitt, who, minus a couple of letters in his last name, couldn't have been more aptly named for what was about to occur. All that said, in both cases, the root cause of the sub sinking were the same: improper use of the toilet's flushing mechanism. As the vessel was cruising around 70 meters below the surface and about 8 miles from Peterhead in Aberdeenshire, Scotland, the popular version states that Captain Schlitt had needed to evacuate his bowels, and so, no doubt with dignity befitting a man of his stature and rank, did his business in the technical toilet. With that done, he was now left to try and flush it. Unable to figure out the complicated contraption, Captain Schlitt called in help from the WC Waste Disposal Unit manager, literally the only guy in the toilet that knew how to flush the U-boat's toilet. And they were literally named by the crew as Der Steinbeck. And unfortunately for the men that would soon die as a result, for whatever reason, that crewman who was supposed to know how to flush the toilet made the mistake and turned the wrong valve. That's the popular version. Let's get to Captain Schlitt's version. In April 1945, U-1206 was in the North Sea of Britain. On board the diesel engines were faulty. We could not charge our batteries by the snorkel anymore. In order to get the diesel working again, we had to shut down about 8 to 10 miles from the British coast at 70 MTS, unseen by British patrols. I was in the engine room, where at the front of the boat there was a water leak. What I have learned is that a mechanic had tried to repair the forward WC's onboard vent. I would say, although I do not have any proof, that the outer vent indicator either gave false readings or none at all. As to why said mechanic was attempting to work on the toilet's outboard vent while deeply submerged, that's every bit as much of a mystery as to why an engineer trained in how to properly flush the toilet would have screwed it up so badly. Of course, it is always possible that the good captain made up his version of things to avoid personal embarrassment back home. Whichever story is true, the result in either case was the contents of the toilet, if any, and the ocean outside shooting like a jet stream into the submarine. Things were about to get a whole lot worse. You see, as alluded to in Captain Schlitt's account, the U-1206 was a diesel-electric sub, featuring twin Germain-Werft F46 four-stroke engines, which charged a bank of batteries, which in turn powered two electric motors capable of producing 750 horsepower combined. The problem was, though, these batteries were stored directly below the bathroom. And according to Captain Schlitt, when the water rushed in, quote, the batteries were covered with seawater. Chlorine gas started to fill the boat. unquote. As this was all happening, Captain Schlitt ordered the vessel to be surfaced. He then states, quote, "The engineer who was in the control room at the time managed to make the boat buoyant and surfaced, despite several severe flooding." So here they were, diesel engines down for maintenance, batteries soaked in seawater, having taken on a significant amount of said water, chlorine gas filling the ship, and on the surface just off the coast of enemy territory. The nightmare for Captain Schlitt was about to get worse. As he noted in his accounts of events, quote, "We were then incapable of diving or moving. At this point, British planes and patrols discovered us." With a few options available, Captain Schlitt ordered various valves on U-1206 be opened in order for it to fill with water, after which crew abandoned the sub, with it shortly thereafter sinking. The crew made their way to the Scottish coast on rubber rafts, but things couldn't go well here either. Schlitt states, quote, "In the attempt to negotiate the steep coast in heavy waters, 3 crew members tragically died. Several men were taken on board a British sloop. The dead were Hans Berkauer, Karl Koren, and Emil Hooper. And ultimately, 10 crew members did make it to shore, but just like their surviving compatriots at sea, were promptly captured. As for what happened to Captain Schlitt after this is unclear, other than he appears to have lived to the ripe old age of 90 years old, dying on April the 7th, 2009. And that is why I consider U-1206 to be the most unfortunate U-boat in history, as being the only one to have been sunk by incorrectly flushing the onboard toilet. Thank you.